We'll start with Dr. Niels Averesh, who will talk about biomanufacturing for space exploration. He will talk about advanced technologies that must be developed to take full advantage of mission supplies and resources.
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, so the floor is yours.
Thanks. This looks different. There we go. Share screen. How's that looking?
Okay, we can see.
You can see.
Yes, we can
nice.
see everything.
And hear me?
Yes.
Splendid. Yeah, that is awesome. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me again. And letting me tell you a bit about microbial biomanufacturing for space exploration, giving a bit more of a high-level overview. Yeah, I'm Niels. I am an academic staff scientist at Stanford University. And I'm also a member of the Center for Utilization of Biological Engineering in Space, short CUBES. Some of you may know CUBES. CUBES is a NASA Space Technology Research Institute, and its objective is to support biomanufacturing for deep space exploration that realizes the inherent mass, power, and volume advantages of biotechnology in space over traditional abiotic approaches. It is basically a grant held by different universities, including Stanford, and headed by Berkeley. And we recently got CUBES renewed for a second period, for a second phase. And CUBES 2 now has two thrusts, one focusing on biological pharmaceuticals and the other one on novel bioplastics, which I am co-leading. And I may have postdoc opportunities available. So if you think you would like to work on something related to that and metabolic engineering, yeah, contact me later. But I'll say that again in the end and give an email address. So yeah, today I'd like to give a high-level overview of the research source considerations of human space travel. Yeah, sending stuff to space is expensive. For example, just to put this into perspective, sending, for example, your favorite cold drink to the ISS costs on the order of $1,000. And yeah, that is really the constraint of anything you do, because if you go further to Mars, for example, these costs multiply exponentially. Yeah, it really depends who you fly with, but the bottom line is it is expensive. And especially if you go further, that falls into weight much more. For example, here are some space travel scenarios compared. While going to the moon, you can basically go back and forth in a couple of days. Going to Mars, you will be on a journey of like over 2 years. So you really, yeah, need to bring everything that you need and might need, or find it somehow. Yeah, the launch cost limit capacity for deep space exploration here. So yeah, you got to choose your carry along your cargo really carefully to be prepared for everything and not to bring too much. And yeah, what I mean with finding it somehow is relying on a concept called in situ manufacturing, to manufacture supplies that are critical on the trip from resources that you have already brought, like recycling them, or that you can find at destination. The question here is really what to take and what to make, and what are the trade-offs. So this is a popular example, just to put this into perspective. Would potatoes, for example, grow on Mars as a supplement to food, so that you don't have to bring all the food? Yeah, they would probably grow, but with a reduced yield. So perchlorate is a substance that's widespread in Martian regolith, and it competes with nitrates in plants and thyroid iodide uptake in humans. So the question is probably not would they grow, but could Mark only have survived on the plants from Martian soil. Anyhow, agriculture is a suboptimal use of the resources. It has a low biomass density per footprint, per volume, so you need a lot of space to grow just some crops that then grow really slow, and it's demanding in a couple of ways. So what really the paradigm would be is using microbes, because they can, or microbial biomanufacturing, because they can grow really quick in really dense. But I'll get back to that later. First, I'd like to introduce how to think basically about the resources, how to classify them. So it makes the whole concept easier to think about when you classify into 3 different categories of inventory items. So food, pharmaceuticals, and materials. And they have different implications and demands in terms of how you need them, when you need them, how much you need them. So for example, food has a regular demand, a consistent volume, and probably a predictable diversity. While pharmaceuticals, you don't need them that often, but when you need them immediately. So that has implications for the rate and the ramp, the startup time for producing those on site. Also, there's a great variety of pharmaceuticals, like from small molecules to protein drugs. So you got to really be prepared for that. And that makes pharmaceuticals especially difficult to account for when you want to in situ manufacture them. The other is materials. You might not need materials all the time, but when you need them, you probably need large-ish volumes. So if you think about 3D printing a replacement part for something that broke, like something made of plastic, that has probably a larger volume than pharmaceuticals, sometimes even larger than food if it's like a larger replacement part. But the applications are also limited. And that has all implications for how to manufacture these and what kind of concepts to use to make these inventory items. So you could make them from existing resources, for example, via recycling. Basically, everything that you bring, you can think about closing the loop on that, recycling it, not only the air that you breathe, but also the food and how it's metabolized and the human waste end products, to recycle those back into different compounds. But which way does really make sense? And that really depends on the availability of the resources and also what you could potentially find at destination. So in space, there isn't much. You can only rely on recycling. You have sunlight and the cargo that you bring, as this Venn diagram shows. On the moon, for example, if you go to the moon, you can find maybe some water, and there's the regolith, which is not super rich, but that gives you a little bit more to work with, maybe. While the real deal is Mars, because there's carbon and nitrogen. In fact, there's let me hide this bit here. In fact, there's quite a lot of carbon on top of the sunlight and the cargo that you bring in the water. In the atmosphere is 6 millibar dense, which is not much, like 0.6% of Earth, but it has 96% carbon dioxide, and that's about 7 trillion metric tons of carbon there, right there, that you could take advantage of. And then there's also water that's much more concentrated than on the moon. For example, in the polar ice caps, that gives you surface access to about 5 million metric tons of water, if you can get to that, which is a logistic issue of other sorts. But the resources are there, at least close. So this is more like an artist's impression of how like a biomanufactory on Mars could work, or what it could look like. And just to give an impression of what we're talking about here. So the real idea here is to use bioreactors for a bunch of different things, alongside of for example, food production with crops, to supplement really what you can bring in cargo and what you can produce with crops, to supplement that with biomanufactured stuff that you can make more easily and faster. The difficulty is, like I mentioned before, how this all interconnects and where these resources are supposed to come from. And for that, we have developed new concepts of operation for architecture of space missions. So this kind of breaks it down a bit better, like the graphic that I showed just before, in terms of how resources are directed or should probably be logically directed. So here in black, we have everything that is derived from cargo, comes out of the rocket or pre-deployment cargo, which would be the habitat itself, the crew, and some processing hardware. In blue arrows is loop closure. Basically, that relates to everything that the astronauts produce and utilize. You can close the loop on that. As well as packaging and end-of-life materials, you could try and close the loop on that as well to, for example, break down plastics and recycle that back into new virgin materials and products. And here orange is in situ research utilization, which you can use to complement your loop closure and recycling. And that really is the paradigm here. If you can take advantage of the resources that you find, in this case on Mars, then you have a chance to increase the capacity of your mission architecture significantly. So how do you take advantage of these Martian resources that I mentioned before? There are different concepts, I'd say, for that as well, or different chemical conversions. So it really is the water and the atmosphere that you can use to an extent through two reactions, really. The water can go through electrolysis, and that gives you hydrogen and oxygen. The atmosphere, the carbon dioxide, can flow into a Sabatier reaction, where you use the hydrogen that you get from the electrolysis, and that gives you methane. Methane and oxygen can be used as fuel for the return journey as a rocket fuel, but also for biotechnology. Carbon dioxide and hydrogen, oxygen and methane are all also feedstocks, substrates for biotechnology. And that is what the next picture gives an overview about. Yes. Different strategies for upcycling, for conversion of carbon dioxide into products that or intermediates that you can use for manufacturing.
If I may interrupt you,
yes.
There are 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm almost through. Thanks. So this basically gives an overview of which kind of microbes you could use for upcycling and taking advantage of the carbon sources that you have. It really depends on the single carbon feedstocks, how to take advantage of those, and how to directly convert them into for example, the end nutrients and therapeutics, or maybe going through biomass first, which is on the very bottom, which is also an option. The ideal path here really depends on a couple of factors, like on the product, the volume, the continuity, and the response time. With that, I'd like to jump to my last slide, which is an overview of different space travel scenarios. Just really quickly, we have differentiated 5 different space travel scenarios and conducted a techno-economic analysis of these. So looking at travel to the moon or to Mars, yeah, you can think about going in different trips and have different length of stay. And this is basically, these 5 scenarios are what this graphic on the right here shows. And we've looked at all the different materials that you will have to bring in these different scenarios. And it turns out that most of all what falls into weight here is, in terms of mass, is the plastic and the metal. And especially in Martian scenarios, the plastic surpasses the metal. And that really is an opportunity here, because plastics you can make microbially through biomanufacturing using synthetic biology. So you could potentially save a lot of your upmass if you had a good system for biomanufacturing of plastics. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. That is actually what I'm doing, using new methods or developing new microbes for production of advanced bioplastics. And yeah, that's also the postdoc position that I potentially have available. So if you're interested in metabolic engineering for space application, contact me, and I'm happy to take questions. Can't hear you for some reason.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, so there's a question from Tomasz. What materials are available to use for ISRU on the moon compared to Mars?
Materials. So on the moon, there is virtually no carbon, if you're thinking about the feedstocks that you can use. So everything has to originate from cargo and through loop closure. On the moon, you might not need to manufacture much, because it's still within reach, within vicinity. So you can relatively easily resupply, especially materials which are not that critical. Anything biomanufacturing on the moon will probably pertain to testing, getting technology readiness up, and supplementing food production to some degree.
I see, thank you. I also have one question. You mentioned that we will be producing a lot of plastic on Mars, right?
That's the idea. That's, I think, what would make most sense, yeah.
So what about the recycling of this plastic? What will we do with it? We will just discard it or reuse it after, I don't know, if it's broken? Excellent
question, yeah. That is another leg of loop closure, I would say. So it makes a lot of sense to recycle these plastics. Lots of people are working on breaking down synthetic materials to make them into new stuff. Since the plastics, if we make them on site, are already bioproducts, breaking them down will probably be even easier than doing that with synthetic materials. So yeah, you can hopefully close the loop on that. That's not something that I am specifically directly working on. First, I want to get to these materials and then see how biodegradable they are. I assume they are.
I see. Thank you. So are there any other questions? The last chance. Oh, yes, there is another one. What's the difference in terms of water availability between Mars and our moon? Are the costs comparable?
Yeah, good question. So it is orders of magnitude. While you have million megatons on the moon, you have trillion megatons on Mars. It is also the density and the distribution. Like mining the moon for water is basically like mining Earth oceans for gold. That makes it extremely difficult. So that's why I think it doesn't make too much sense. But some people argue there's probably frozen water somewhere in shaded craters, which has yet to be proven. While on Mars, there are good indications of underground reservoirs of liquid water even. So you don't have to even travel all the way to the poles to dig up the water there.
Okay, thank you. So I think that was the last question. Thank you very much for your presentation.